Welcome to the debate. If a fire alarm goes off in a crowded building, the standard expectation is a mechanical response.
Right, you want to fix the problem.
Exactly. You don't just hand everyone in the building a pair of noise-canceling headphones and, ask them to practice deep breathing.
No, obviously not.
You find the faulty sensor, you repair the wiring, and you shut the alarm off at its source.
Right, but what if there is no actual fire? What if the alarm itself is just this benign, quiet hum in the background, and the real emergency is the absolute panic it triggers in the building's occupants?
Well, that's suddenly fixing the wire isn't the immediate priority. Calming the occupants down so they don't trample each other is, right?
And that is the exact dilemma facing millions of people right now. Today, we're looking at the profound evolution in the clinical management of tinnitus, specifically as we look at the landscape in 2025 and now early 2026.
It's a massive shift.
It really is. We are drawing directly from current clinical frameworks, the latest literature on neuromodulation, and recent clinical trials. We're examining a fundamental shift in how medicine approaches a phantom sound that affects, roughly 15% of the population?
Yeah, about 15%. And it is a condition that can completely derail a person's life. It really forces us to ask a critical question about where modern medicine should direct its resources and its research.
Absolutely. So the core question is this. Should the primary focus of modern tinnitus treatment be active neurological intervention to reverse maladaptive brain activity, or
should it remain focused on facilitating psychological and behavioral habituation to that phantom sound?
Right. And I argue that the future, and frankly the most effective framework for tinnitus management, lies in active, targeted neuromodulation, along with regenerative pharmacotherapy aimed at physically reversing the underlying neural hyperactivity.
And I contend that because the intense distress of tinnitus is fundamentally mediated by the autonomic and limbic systems, behavioral therapies, the ones focused on psychological habituation, must remain the most reliable and essential core of treatment.
Well, to really understand this, we have to look at the underlying mechanism, right? What researchers call the central gain model.
Yep, the classic gain model.
Right, because for decades, the medical community viewed tinnitus as an ear problem. But contemporary understanding proves it's really a systemic brain misfire. The initial injury is usually peripheral, sure.
Like noise exposure.
Yeah, exactly. Let's say you have damage to the delicate hair cells in the cochlea from a loud concert or aging or toxic medication. Suddenly, the brain is deprived of normal external auditory input.
It's starved for sound.
Exactly. So in response, the brain's auditory cortex triggers a homeostatic response. Think of the brain like an old television trying to find a broadcast channel. When the ear stops sending a clear signal, the brain desperately turns the internal volume, the gain, up to maximum, just trying to catch whatever signal is left.
But all it catches is internal static.
Exactly that. Internal static. The dorsal cochlear nucleus, which acts as the brain's main audio processing gateway, starts firing hyperactively.
Right.
The neurons synchronize. They lock together and misfire in this endless loop. That synchronized electrical firing is the literal, physical manifestation of the phantom ringing or buzzing the patient hears.
It's fascinating biology, but
here's why it matters today. The medical field has transitioned to active neuromodulation because we no longer have to guess about this hardware malfunction. We can actually target it.
with neuromodulation?
Yes, the emergence of bimodal neuromodulation, devices like the FDA-approved Linear system or the Susan Shore Oracle prototype, it shows that we can objectively rewire these synchronized brain circuits. We don't just have to ask a suffering patient to ignore them anymore.
Look, I don't dispute the neurophysiological origins of the sound. The central gain model is solid, foundational science.
Glad we agree on the physics.
We do. But if we want to understand the actual disease, the thing that ruins lives, right, we have to look at Dr. Paul Jastreboff's neurophysiological model. The auditory signal, that synchronized misfiring you mentioned, that is not the true pathology.
How can you say it's not the pathology? It's the source of the sound.
Because we know this for a fact. There are millions of people, classified as Category 0 patients, who perceive tinnitus constantly but experience absolutely zero distress.
Sure, but
No, think about it. They hear the ringing, they go to work, they sleep soundly, and they go about their day. The debilitating condition only arises when that auditory signal crosses over and triggers the limbic system.
The emotional center.
Right, the system that controls our emotions, and the autonomic nervous system, which controls our fight or flight response.
But you can't just separate the two like that. That emotional distress is a direct, exhausting result of a physiological misfiring that the patient literally cannot escape.
The distress is an evolutionary reaction to a stimulus the brain has incorrectly labeled as a mortal threat. I mean, if you are walking in the woods and hear a rattlesnake, your brain floods your body with adrenaline.
Obviously.
Your focus zeroes in on the sound. That is a healthy survival mechanism. Tinnitus hijacks that exact same loop. The brain classifies the benign internal ringing as a threat, so it constantly monitors it, which causes anxiety.
Which makes it louder.
Exactly, which makes the sound seem louder, which causes more anxiety. That is why cognitive behavioral therapy and tinnitus retraining therapy possess the strongest research evidence. They target the actual source of the suffering.
Through habituation.
Right. Through cognitive restructuring and directed sound therapy, we teach the brain to reclassify the phantom sound as neutral background noise. We teach the brain to habituate.
Oh, okay. I see why you emphasize the emotional toll. I really do. But let me give you a different perspective on how we actually break that loop. When we look at real-world U.S. clinical data for bimodal neuromodulation from the last couple of years, the results are staggering.
Are they, though?
There. Let's look at the Lanier device. It pairs auditory tones played through headphones with mild electrical stimulation of the tongue. The data shows that over 80% of patients with moderate or severe tinnitus achieved a clinically significant drop in their symptom severity within just 12 weeks.
A clinically significant drop as measured by subjective questionnaires, right?
Measured by the Tinnitus Handicap Inventory, yes, with patients seeing a massive reduction in their scores.
Right, subjective.
Okay, but if you want rigorous blinded data, look at the 2023 JAMA study on the Susan Shore bisensory device out of the University of Michigan.
The Shore device, yeah.
That was a double-blind, randomized clinical trial. They paired sound with electrical stimulation of the neck or jaw to target the dorsal cochlear nucleus directly. After 6 weeks, patients saw significant, measurable reductions in their tinnitus volume and distress.
Just by stimulating the jaw?
They used precisely timed pulses to teach the neurons to stop firing together. It physically alters the neural pathways. It's not just a mood boost.
Okay, that is a highly compelling data set, I'll admit, but we really need to unpack the severe limitations of that research. Let's take the Shore device. The science is elegant, sure, but it is heavily restricted to patients with somatic tinnitus.
It is targeted, yes.
Heavily restricted. Somatic tinnitus means the patient can physically change the pitch or volume of their ringing by, like, clenching their jaw, or pressing on their forehead, or moving their neck.
Which is very common.
While that is common, excluding non-somatic patients means this technology is not a universal fix. Furthermore, as of early 2026, the Shore device isn't even fully available to the public. It has been tied up in development and regulatory processes.
Well, Lanier is FDA approved right now, and it does not require the patient to have somatic tinnitus to be effective.
True. But let me challenge the fundamental nature of these bimodal devices. I mean, are we truly fixing the broken hardware of the brain? Or is zapping the tongue while playing audio tones just a highly sophisticated, incredibly expensive distraction tool?
A distraction tool? Seriously?
Yes. Think about it. Traditional tinnitus retraining therapy uses ear-level sound generators that play broadband white noise to help the brain habituate. Lanier uses sound and tongue stimulation. I just don't buy that this is a complete paradigm shift.
It absolutely is a paradigm shift.
Ultimately, it relies on the exact same psychological habituation principles. You're just distracting the brain's attention networks long enough for that autonomic threat response to power down.
I have to push back strongly there, because you are equating a targeted neuroplastic intervention with simple acoustic masking, and biologically, they are entirely different.
Are they?
Yes, the tongue stimulation in Lanier isn't just a parlor trick to distract the patient. The tongue is connected to the trigeminal nerve, The trigeminal nerve is a massive sensory superhighway in the face.
Right.
And it turns out that highway has an off-ramp right next to the auditory cortex in the brain. Zapping the tongue while playing a sound is like snapping your fingers directly in front of a hypnotized person.
That's a strong analogy.
It shocks the brain's attention networks, forces the release of neurotransmitters that facilitate neuroplasticity, and physically breaks the synchronized firing loop. Treating this purely as a psychological hurdle ignores the physiological reality of the synaptic damage.
But the physiological damage isn't what is keeping the patient awake for 3 days straight. The emotional reaction is.
Look, you wouldn't use meditation to treat a broken bone, would you?
Come on,
No, hear me out. Yes, the meditation will absolutely help the patient manage the pain and the panic of the fracture. It has immense value, but it completely ignores the broken bone. And we are finally at a point in medical history where we can see the fracture.
See the fracture? You mean the biomarkers?
Exactly. Last year, in 2025, we saw the breakthrough development of objective biomarkers for tinnitus. Researchers developed a light-based brain activity test that uses artificial intelligence to distinguish between mild and severe tinnitus with nearly 90% accuracy.
Which is impressive, yes.
We don't have to rely solely on subjective questionnaires anymore. We can actually see the phantom sound in the brain's activity.
Having a biomarker is an incredible advancement. Absolutely. It allows us to measure a patient's distress objectively, which is huge for clinical trials. But seeing the phantom sound on a scan doesn't automatically validate the current pharmaceutical or device-based cures.
But it validates the targeted pharmacological pipeline because we can finally measure if a drug is working on the hardware.
If the drugs actually work.
Look at the novel drug candidates emerging right now. We have AC-102, a specialized compound where preclinical studies showed it could actually rebuild the broken physical bridges, the synapses, between the auditory nerve and the inner ear sensory cells.
In preclinical studies, yeah.
And we have SPI-1005, an oral anti-inflammatory that received FDA breakthrough therapy designation. Researchers are investigating NMDA receptor antagonist. These are drugs designed to stop excitotoxicity.
Which is when the neurons get overstimulated.
Right, when neurons in the ear are stimulated so intensely by loud noise that they literally fire themselves to death. We are targeting the root cause now.
Look, a biological cure, a true magic pill, is the holy grail of otolaryngology. I will gladly concede that, and I genuinely hope we get there. But let's talk about the clinical reality of pharmacotherapy when it comes to the ear.
Okay.
Historically, and even in standard practice today, medications are far more likely to cause tinnitus than cure it.
You're referring to ototoxicity?
Yes, ototoxicity is a massive clinical hurdle. We administer aminoglycoside antibiotics for severe infections. We use platinum-based chemotherapy drugs like cisplatin for cancer. We use loop diuretics for heart failure.
Right. Life-saving drugs.
Life-saving but toxic to the ear. Even taking high doses of over-the-counter anti-inflammatories like ibuprofen or aspirin can trigger ringing. These drugs literally poison the delicate hair cells inside the cochlea.
But that's usually temporary.
Sometimes the damage reverses if you stop taking the drug, sure. But with chemotherapy and certain powerful antibiotics, the inner ear cells die off permanently. The pharmaceutical industry has a very long way to go to prove it can safely operate within the microscopic environment of the inner ear without causing collateral damage.
Which is precisely why regenerative compounds like AC-102 are so revolutionary. They are designed to repair the exact cellular damage caused by that autotrauma.
But until that experimental drug is sitting on a pharmacy shelf, cleared by the FDA, and proven safe for long-term use, we have to treat the desperate patient sitting in the clinic today.
Well, obviously we treat them to death.
But if you're listening to this and you haven't slept in 3 nights because of a high-pitched scream only you can hear, telling you to just wait for a new drug is agonizing. A holistic health approach, like cognitive behavioral therapy, is vastly superior to waiting for a miracle.
CBT has its place, yes.
It doesn't just address the sound, it addresses the catastrophic thinking, the thought errors that act as an amplifier for the ringing. It incorporates rigorous sleep hygiene, because a quiet bedroom at night is when tinnitus is at its absolute worst.
That's true. Sleep is a huge issue.
It tackles the concurrent anxiety and depression that affect up to half of all chronic sufferers. You cannot fix a patient's sleep hygiene or their depression with an NMDA receptor antagonist.
That is a fair critique of the current wait times, though I would frame the psychological aspect differently.
How so?
The reason these patients suffer from severe anxiety and catastrophic thinking is that their brain is being subjected to a relentless, inescapable internal siren. If we eliminate the siren, the anxiety dissipates.
But what happens when patients pause their lives waiting for you to turn the siren off? This introduces a crucial, incredibly frustrating dilemma that audiologists are facing right now in clinics.
The waiting dilemma.
Exactly. Because of the constant media hype around prototype devices and emerging inner ear drugs, patients are increasingly stuck between hope and hesitation. They are actively delaying available, proven therapies while waiting for unreleased technology.
Well, waiting is certainly detrimental to recovery.
It's worse than detrimental. It allows those maladaptive neural loops to become deeply entrenched in the brain. Tinnitus thrives on auditory deprivation.
Right.
The most effective, immediate action for a vast majority of these patients is simply treating their underlying sensory neural hearing loss. Up to 85% of subjective tinnitus patients have concurrent hearing loss.
Yes, the correlation is huge.
So fitting them with a properly programmed hearing aid restores the ambient environmental sound. That natural background noise reduces the contrast that makes the tinnitus seem so piercingly loud. More importantly, it feeds the starving auditory cortex the signal it has been looking for.
True.
But patients won't wear hearing aids if they think a magic pill or a neck zapping device is going to cure them in 6 months.
I agree completely that delaying treatment is a clinical mistake. But the danger of waiting actually supports the aggressive use of the physical interventions we do have available right now.
Like what? Prescribing Linaire on day 1?
Yes. If a patient comes in, we shouldn't just offer them talk therapy and hearing aids. We should immediately deploy bimodal stimulation, like Linaire. And for severe cases, particularly those involving profound single-sided deafness, the data we have on cochlear implants is astonishing.
Cochlear implantation is a major surgical intervention, though. You are literally drilling into the skull.
It is a surgery, yes. But look at the clinical studies from 2025. For patients with single-sided deafness and debilitating tinnitus, cochlear implants show nearly a 2/3 cure rate for the ringing.
2/3?
By physically inserting an electrode array into the deaf ear, we restore the auditory input. We enable the brain to perform bimodal processing again, meaning both sides of the brain are communicating.
Okay, but
The internal static is suppressed because the central auditory system is finally receiving the electrical stimulation it was starving for. The ultimate goal in the clinic should always be eliminating the percept entirely, not just managing the patient's emotional distress while the percept continues to blare.
We have to be honest about the statistics, even with invasive procedures. Even with a cochlear implant, nearly 40% of those patients still experience their tinnitus.
Well, 62.5% success is incredible for a condition once thought incurable.
But for the vast majority of tinnitus sufferers who have subjective ringing but aren't deaf enough to qualify for a cochlear implant, eliminating the percept entirely is still incredibly rare.
Rare, but becoming more possible.
But because the suffering of tinnitus is so inextricably linked to the autonomic and limbic systems, the bedrock of reliable care must remain cognitive restructuring and habituation.
Even as our technological ability to intervene advances so rapidly.
Especially as the technology advances. Hardware will eventually fail or need recalibration. Experimental drugs will inevitably have side effects. But teaching a patient's brain to naturally filter out meaningless noise, the exact same way your brain filters out the hum of your refrigerator or the feeling of the shirt resting on your shoulders right now.
That's classic habituation.
Yes, it is the most universally accessible, non-invasive, and proven path to restoring a person's quality of life. It empowers the patient. It proves to them that their brain can heal itself, rather than making them permanently dependent on a proprietary device or, an expensive pharmaceutical.
I certainly see the value in patient empowerment, and I agree that behavioral support and treating underlying hearing deprivation are essential first steps in any clinical framework. You have to stop the panic.
Right.
But the era of active neurological intervention has undeniably arrived. We are no longer limited to just counseling patients through their distress and hoping they learn to ignore it. Bimodal stimulation, objective AI-driven biomarkers that let us see the sound, and emerging regenerative pharmacology offer the unprecedented promise of treating the root neuroplastic hyperactivity directly. We are finally learning how to rewire the broken circuits.
Well, we definitely find common ground on the urgency of care. Delaying treatment in hopes of a future perfect cure is a dangerous mistake.
Completely agree.
Whether a patient pursues tinnitus retraining therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, or an FDA-approved neuromodulation device, early intervention is critical. You have to intervene before those hyperactive neural pathways and the emotional trauma become fully locked in.
Absolutely. The rapidly shifting landscape of otolaryngology requires us to consider both the physiological hardware and the psychological software of this incredibly complex condition.
The brain and the mind, yeah.
Right. We've explored the evidence on both sides today, from the promise of bimodal neuromodulation breaking the neural loop to the proven resilience built through cognitive behavioral therapies. There is a wealth of material out there for you to explore as you draw your own conclusions about the future of tinnitus care.
It really does come back to how you view that building's fire alarm.
It does. Do you focus your energy on repairing the faulty sensor generating the noise, or do you focus on calming the occupants so they can safely ignore the sound? Thank you for joining us on The Debate.